One of the nice things about owning steel bikes and being able to braze is that it's relatively easy to modify my frames. In this video series, I'll be doing a bunch of modifications to turn my old mountain bike into a bikepacking bike. Back in 2021, I built my first true mountain bike frame, which was designed around a 100mm fork. During the build, I got a really good deal on a much nicer but longer fork, which slacked everything out a bit more than I liked. So in 2024, I built a replacement around that longer fork, which left this frame to be built up into something new. For a while, it was my errand bike, but that wasn't really the right build for this frame. So I decided that I'd turn it into a bike packer. I've been wanting to try a head tube mounted front rack for a while now, and this was a perfect opportunity. I'm interested to see how the handling will change when the weight of the cargo isn't linked to the steering. At the very least, I think it'll be more stable when leaning up against stuff. Another one of my goals for this project was to do away with zip ties when I install a basket. I used roughly 15 of them to attach the basket last time, and I want something cleaner. Something that lets me remove and install the basket relatively quickly and with less waste. I'm a big fan of the front basket. It fits well with how I use a lot of my bikes. With a bungee net, I can just throw stuff in and go. A lock, some food, a jacket, a 12-pack, whatever. And I don't have to worry about a $200 bag getting stolen if I lock it up somewhere. The only drawbacks are if I want to carry smaller items or keep something protected from the elements. In those cases, I have a Surly bag that fits nicely into the basket. So I'm building this bike up with a 100mm suspension fork, gears, knobby 650B tires, and eventually a dropper post. The first step is to lay out the front rack. I had a basic plan for the main supports, but the rest I just kind of figured out as I went. I haven't done any bike packing since college, and even then I only did it once or twice. Back then, bike packing was me putting all my camping stuff into my hiking backpack and riding my bike into the woods. The bike maybe had a small seat bag with tools and a tube, and the only thing attached to the frame was a water bottle cage. Today, I want the exact opposite setup. Nearly everything will be attached to the bike. It's been tough to get back into some of the activities that I did so much of when I lived in Montana, including camping. Don't get me wrong, I love Minneapolis, I love Minnesota, and we have great outdoor opportunities. But in my opinion, the mountain biking, snowboarding, and backpacking are just on a completely different level when you have actual mountains. So I'm a relative bikepacking newbie, but I've done a lot of backcountry camping, and I think that experience will be helpful. Over the last few years, I've turned down a lot of bikepacking invitations because I don't have any modern gear. And getting into it seemed like a slippery slope to buying a bunch of expensive equipment. But this summer I decided to look into it, and I was pleasantly surprised to find some good budget options for the stuff I wanted. I also dug out some of my old backpacking gear. My plan is to use some of my existing stuff, but also get a few modern items. This is part 1 of a 3-video series. In the next 2 videos, I'll design and build a custom rear rack, then I'll make some modifications to the front triangle. I wasn't sure how much I'd use this Harbor Freight welding table when I bought it a couple years ago, but it's really earning its keep on this project. I went back and forth on how to attach the rack to the frame, but I eventually settled on using these scrap pieces of 4130 plate and brazing them into slots in the main supports. Then I added short tubes with M6 bosses as standoffs for the head tube. Notice that small ball of brass sitting on the fixture? That's from me trying to defy gravity before the metal was hot enough. The bronze goes where the heat is, and if the metal isn't hot enough, it doesn't stick. I also added an upper brace and 4 bosses on the main supports for attaching a basket. I made the standoffs in 2 parts so I wouldn't need to be super accurate or precise when cutting them to length. Plus, it would give me a little wiggle room when doing the final brazing. The inner standoffs have an M6 boss brazed into the end, and these slip inside the outer standoffs, which are mitered and brazed to that too. This way I could bolt the inners to the rack, and then use the rack as a fixture to hold the outers to the head tube. Once I checked to make sure everything was centered, I just brazed the two parts of the standoffs together. This is definitely some of the more creative fixturing I've done, with lots of eyeballing to try and get things straight. After all that brazing, there was a bit of distortion in the head tube, so I brought it to the bike shop for a quick reaming. Thanks again to Angry Catfish for all the help with this and all my other projects. So here it is, all built up. I did have to add a longer front brake cable and move the fork lockout remote. Normally a rack moves with the cables, but since this rack doesn't move, the cables can get caught on it as the bars are turned. I've ridden a lot of bikes with racks over the years, and seeing the rack just sit there when I turn the bars is really weird and gonna take some getting used to. And now I'm ready to test it out. Between a big chain lock and a 12 pack, I have about 12.5 pounds in the basket. I'm sure it'll hold more, but this is a good first test. And in reality, I wouldn't want to put more than 10 pounds on the front of my bike for bikepacking. Obviously, when you add over 12 pounds to the front of the bike, you'll notice it. The bike itself felt heavier, but the steering didn't. With the normal front rack, when you turn and lean the bike, you feel the pull of that extra weight through the handlebars. It takes more force to hold the handlebars steady, and it makes the steering feel clunky. It doesn't really happen with this setup. During my ride, I kept coming back to that thought. The bike feels heavier, but the steering doesn't. I really like the way this setup rides compared to having the rack attached to the fork or handlebars. And I'm looking forward to testing it out on some rougher terrain. I also like the fact that I can have a front rack on a bike with a suspension fork. And opposed to just adding cargo cages to the fork lowers, anything I put on the front rack is sprung weight that's supported by the suspension. And as a bonus, it does seem more stable when I park it up against a wall. And there it is. Part 1 of the Bikepacker series is done. If you enjoyed this video, consider a super thanks. And if you haven't watched my other videos, go check them out. Thanks for watching. Take care. See you next time.